Okay, so people, we will discuss a little more about the RH factor. We have seen in detail how RH factor can actually impact pregnancies and how it can be very dangerous to the unborn child. Okay, the person might the child might lose his or her life while it is still there in the mother's womb due to the RH factor. Okay, so any of the blood groups which we have, that is AB or O, any of these blood groups can have RH positive or RH negative. So any of these blood groups can have RH positive. The presence of RH factor is known as RH positive. The absence of RH factor is known as RH negative. So if RH factor is present, then obviously the RH antigen will be there on the surface of RBC. Okay, so individuals having RH plus and RH minus blood groups are more or less normal. Okay, that is, and we have seen that there is a huge amount of people who are actually having RH plus or RH minus as their blood groups. So RH minus individuals do not have antibodies against the RH factor. This is one reason why blood transfusions or during pregnancy complications can be created. Okay, so RH minus individuals do not have any antibodies against the RH factor. So RH factor is important to be considered during blood transfusions, okay, and during pregnancy. We have seen this in detail. The RH minus blood responds against the RH plus blood by producing antibodies against the RH factor. So what happens is during the pregnancy, the mother's blood, let's say this is basically the mother's womb and this is basically the child. So if the mother is RH negative, this is the placental barrier, okay, and let's say the child is RH positive. Nothing will happen during this circumstance, okay, nothing will happen as the placental barrier, there will be no intermixing of blood. However, when the umbilical cord is cut, then what happens is a fair amount of RH plus blood goes into the mother's body from the child, and what happens is that antibodies are generated. The antibodies which are generated are against the RH factor. So anti-RH bodies are generated, because of which the mother's blood will now have RH plus factor. It is not getting converted, but antibodies against RH have been generated. Now this RH plus, these antibodies which are generated, the second time a child comes in, these antibodies are basically of the type IgG. So the second time a child comes in, this will be able to pass through the placental barrier. This will be able to pass through the placental barrier. In the previous case, since the mother's blood was RH negative, there was no intermixing of blood. However, in the second case of pregnancy, since RH plus antibodies have been generated, they will be able to pass through the placental barrier and enter into the fetal blood, destroying the fetus. Okay, so this destruction of the fetus will result in complication. The RBCs will start getting destroyed. Okay, so this RBCs will be destroyed. So RH plus responds against RH blood by producing antibodies against the RH factor, and that will result in the death of the child. Well, a lot of complications will happen. Okay, so the RH minus blood can be, so when we are talking about transfusion, the RH minus blood can be transferred to RH plus blood. So RH minus blood, a person having RH minus blood can easily transfer the blood even if the recipient is RH plus, because see, this will not have any antibodies this will not have any anti-RH plus blood. So obviously this can get easily transferred. There will be no confusions here. Okay, RH minus and RH plus. So obviously we know that RH plus will have the RH antigen. In its plasma there might be antibodies which will be produced, but again, as I said, the plasma of the donor is so diluted that it will hardly have any effect. Okay, so this can be easily done, but when RH plus blood from donor is transferred into RH minus blood, that's when the problem will happen, because now the RH minus blood will produce, this is the donor basically, let's say this is the donor and this is the recipient. So RH minus will now produce antibodies to fight against this, and that's when the problem will start. So all these RBCs will start getting killed. So whatever antibodies are produced in the plasma, that's not a threat, okay, because the plasma eventually gets diluted. But whatever antibodies are produced against the surface antigen, that will be a problem, because that will start getting killed. And if the RH plus blood from donor is transferred into RH minus blood, the RH minus recipient responds by producing RH antibodies, and this leads to clumping of blood cells. This will lead to clumping of blood cells. So this is dangerous, okay, and that's the reason we say that O negative is a universal donor. Why? Because in O blood group there is no antigen A, there is no antigen B, so there is no threat from the recipient's blood to produce antibodies against A and B. Okay, there is no antigen AB as well, because and that basically makes things all the more smoother, because no antibodies from the recipient's blood will be produced against these antigens, because any which ways these antigens are not present on the surface of the RBC. Okay, but if it is negative, there is RH negative, that will be all the more helpful, because if it is RH negative, irrespective of whether the donor is RH negative, if the donor is RH negative, well and good, okay, no antigens produced. And if the donor is somehow RH positive, then antibodies will be produced here in the recipient's blood. But again, as I said, the antibodies will be produced here against the antigen here present in the donor's blood. But the plasma of the donor is so diluted with the blood of the recipient that there is hardly any impact. So it can be, that's the reason O negative is a universal donor. O negative can donate his, her or her blood to anyone, okay, without causing any complications. Okay, so this can prove to be fatal if that's the reason in your blood groups it's not always A or B, it's B positive if RH factor is there, or A negative if RH factor is not there. It is very important for this factor to be mentioned. RH negative is something that might not be mentioned, but positive is something that has to be mentioned. Okay, so our blood groups will always have the A, B, O or whatever category we fall into, along with the positive or negative respective signs, because they are very important during blood transfusions. Otherwise carelessness on this part might prove dangerous to somebody's life. It will lead to clumping of the blood cells, and it can prove fatal and to somebody's life during transfusion, for whatever reasons the transfusion has happened. Now we have seen that during pregnancy how things get complicated in the previous slide. In the previous video we have seen how the RH factor in pregnant women gets complicated. If the woman is RH negative and the child is RH negative, no problems. RH positive, child RH positive, no problems. The problem starts when the woman or the mother is RH negative and the child is RH positive. Okay, so that's when it starts. Again, this is a genetic combination, so we have no control over it. Okay, the problem is that antibodies, the RH minus individuals do not have antibodies against the RH factor. The RH negative individuals do not have natural antibodies against the RH factor. They are not pre-installed. They get installed once they encounter it. Okay, so during pregnancy we have seen how the erythroblastosis fetalis happens, which means that the mother's blood which has antibodies developed against RH positive or RH antigen enters or crosses the placental barrier, because it belongs to the IgG group, and it enters the fetal blood, and that's when the erythroblastosis fetalis happens, wherein the child loses all the RBCs. Erythroblastosis, arthro means RBC, and all the RBCs basically start blasting, and this results to fetalysis. We also call this as hemolytic disease of the unborn. Hemolytic disease of the unborn, which is represented in the abbreviated form of HDN. Hemolytic disease of the unborn, which results in premature or anemic child. So this will result in a premature or anemic child, and this will create jaundice or brain damage. It will lead to a jaundice or brain damage curve. So blood of such premature death stillborn. So what this can lead to many factors. This can lead to a premature or anemic child. This can lead to severe case of jaundice or even brain damage, and this can lead to premature death or a stillborn. So these are basic factors. What if the child is somehow born, we can save it only if we have the entire blood replaced by transfusion. So the entire blood of the child has to be replaced by transfusion. So many complexities out here. We are not sure whether the child will be able to save his or her life, and even if the child is born, the entire blood needs to be replaced. Okay, so these are complications. One thing that we can do, and yesterday we have seen, is that there are certain drugs which are available in the market. So once after the first pregnancy, when the Rh negative mother has delivered a Rh positive child, so after the first pregnancy she is administered some anti-Rh drugs, because of which whatever antibodies have been developed against Rh antigen in her blood get killed. So she would be safe to handle a second pregnancy. Okay, so these are certain things about Rh factor. We need to be very careful about all these factors, both in terms of handling transfusions and also during considering pregnancy cases. Okay. Okay, so we will now discuss about how platelets are formed. How basically platelets are formed. Very important, because these platelets are, as we saw, that there is a slight difference between platelets and thrombocytes, but most of the books actually refer to them as the same. Okay, so at injury sites what happens is there is a lot of loss of blood. So a coagulation of blood is required. Okay, so in injury sites where injury has happened, okay, there is a coagulation of blood that is required. Okay, why? Because it prevents the blood loss and also checks the entry of germs, both the things. Okay, so there is from the injury side, if the blood loss is not prevented, the entire body blood is going to drain out, and that would prove fatal for the person who is injured. And the injury can either be external or internal. Many of our internal injuries, we don't even know they get healed internally because of coagulation of blood. The external injuries we can see, and we can see that there's so understand this. Whenever there is a site of injury, the body heals by itself. You might have seen that deeper injury cuts or surgeries need stitching. Now stitching is not something which will prevent the blood loss. Stitching just facilitates the coagulation process. It's the body's ability to cope up with it. Okay, so the blood clotting will happen. Okay, so stitching just ensures that the skin which has ruptured is close enough for the clotting to heal it. So it's a natural process of the body to heal it. So coagulation of blood, it prevents blood loss and also checks the entry of germs. Okay, so it's basically a very complex phenomena. We are going to cover it up in maybe 2 or 3 slides, and it involves approximately 12 different factors. So 12 different factors are involved in the coagulation of blood. So some very important stages in sequence, if we see, the first stage is release of thromboplastin. Release of thromboplastin means the blood flows through the wound. So as and when, let's say there is an injury, the blood will flow through it, and this blood will get exposed to air. Okay, so blood flows through the wound, and the blood platelets, the blood platelets in the blood get exposed to air. So the damaged cells and injured platelets liberate an enzyme which is known as thromboplastin. So the damaged cells and the injured platelets will liberate an enzyme which is known as thromboplastin. So that is one sequence out here. Okay, so formation of fibrin, thrombin. Formation of thrombin. I'm so sorry. So this thrombin is formed. Thromboplastin, which is actually formed here, together with many clotting factors. So we'll look and discuss about the clotting factors a little later. But thromboplastin, along with many clotting factors and calcium ions, acts on the plasma protein prothrombin. So there is a plasma protein called prothrombin. The thromboplastin basically along with calcium ions and many clotting factors, and calcium ions will act on the plasma protein prothrombin and converts it into an active enzyme called thrombin. This gets converted into an active enzyme called thrombin. Okay, formation of fibrin. The thrombin being a proteolytic enzyme, it is basically a protoplasmic enzyme, acts on the soluble plasma protein fibrinogen. So quite a number of things that might get confused. Okay, we will look into the sequence, but this is the theory part which we need to remember. Okay, the plasma protein fibrinogen and changes it into insoluble fibrin. This is basically changing into insoluble fibrin. Now, formation of blood clot. The insoluble fibrin precipitates as network of fibers. So this basically will precipitate as network of fibers. RBCs and WBCs get trapped. So all the RBCs and WBCs which are basically formed get trapped to form a red solid mass, and this red solid mass is known as the blood clot. Okay, we have seen at injury sites the brownish thing that develops after a few days is nothing but a blood clot. Okay, this clot dries and gets hardened, forming a cap under which the wound heals. So under a cap under which the wound heals. So these are certain things which will happen during blood clotting, a very complex phenomena. We will try and make it easier and see how we can basically memorize the entire process. Okay. Okay, so in a nutshell, we talked about the different clotting procedures that happened or that generally happens, but as we saw that in the earlier segment, we saw that there are 12 clotting factors. Okay, now these clotting factors are running in the bloodstream in the normal flow. The moment an injury happens, whether it is internal or external, where there is a leakage from where blood oozes out, these clotting factors get activated and they ensure that the blood is not coming out from that injury site. Okay, so they are without any active role when it is normal blood flow, and they get activated the moment there is an injury, and that's how the blood loss is prevented. So these clotting factors are a little complex, and the chain of reactions that they generate is a little complex. It's difficult to remember them, but some techniques that and it's important from human physiology point of view for your various competitive examinations. So these clotting factors are named in Roman numerals. Now if you see that I had mentioned, or most of your books have mentioned 12 clotting factors, but here if you look at the number, it is coming to 13. Why this ambiguity? Yes, there is a reason for it. We will look into the reason why saying 12 and then writing 13. There is a difference. Yes, the reason why there is a difference, we'll discuss that later, but first let's understand the basics. So according to International Commission on Blood Coagulation, so we have basically different commissions which follow a general trend for naming things. Let's say we have IUPAC for organic and inorganic chemistry, the naming of compounds. So in the same way, we have an International Commission on Blood Coagulation, which in 1964 has listed 13 clotting factors for blood, and all these clotting factors are written in Roman numerals. All these clotting factors are presented in Roman numerals. Okay, one thing that we need to understand here is that questions can be in different ways in various competitive examinations. They might ask you about the 5th clotting factor. Okay, so this is the basic clotting factor, they might ask you about the name, and they might ask you which clotting factor is it. So you will have to, so let's say if we are referring to the 12th clotting factor, the Hangman or the surface factor, here you will not write 12 as a number. Here 12 as a Roman number needs to be written. So be very clear about these things. Okay, they are written in Roman numerals, and there are 13 clotting factors. We can also call them as 12 clotting factors, and we will see why the difference. Okay, so the first clotting factor that we would be talking about is fibrinogen. It is produced in liver. Most of the clotting factors are produced in the liver. Then we have the prothrombin. Just one moment, people. Then we have the prothrombin, okay, which is again produced in the liver. Then we have the thromboplastin, which is basically an enzyme which is released from the damaged platelets. The enzyme which is released from the damaged platelets. Okay, just one moment here. Okay, so we have these 12 clotting factors. We'll discuss it in detail. So the first one is fibrinogen, which is basically produced in the liver. Then we have prothrombin. Again, as I said, we have to write it in Roman numerals. We cannot write it as 1, 2 and something like that. So we have fibrinogen, which is produced in the liver. Then we have prothrombin, which is again produced in the liver. Then we have thromboplastin, which is an enzyme which is released from damaged platelets. Okay. Then we have calcium ions. The activation of calcium ions are very essential for the activation of thromboplastin. Then we have the labile factor or proacetylene. The labile factor or the proacetylene, it is synthesized in the liver. Then we have acelyrin, that is hypothetical factor. Okay. Now look at this acelyrin. Just as I said, instead of 13 we write 12. Why? Because acelyrin is a hypothetical factor. Now what exactly do we mean by a hypothetical factor? A hypothetical factor means that there is an ambiguity between scientists about this factor. Some say that this exists, some say that doesn't exist, some say that it exists independently, while some say that it exists as in combination with other factors. So there is an ambiguity, because of which in some books it is written as 12 factors, and in some it is written as 13. But the commission has approved for 13. So acelyrin is basically a hypothetical factor. Okay, it has still not been isolated, but it has been detected. It has been detected, but scientists have basically difference of opinions regarding this factor, and hence the total number is counted as 12 in some places. However, 13 is the original number. Okay, now if you write 12, it's not wrong, but to be very precise, as per the approval from the commission, this factor has been given a separate recognition, and hence 13 factors. Okay, we have the stable factor of proconvertin. Okay, then we have anti-hemophilic factor. Anti-hemophilic factor, and what is happening is, see, there are 3 types of anti-hemophilic factors, A, B and C, and if any one of these anti-hemophilic factors there is a deficiency, it will basically result in the increase of the clotting time. So anti-hemophilic factor is also written as AHF, and the deficiency of this anti-hemophilic factor increases the clotting time. Then we have the Christmas factor or plasma thromboplastin component. This is Christmas factor or plasma thromboplastin component, which is also known as PTC. Okay, the deficiency causes hemophilia B. Then we have the Stewart power factor, which is basically in liver, the Stewart power factor. Then we have the plasma thromboplastin. Plasma thromboplastin is basically an antecedent. Okay, and this is in an abbreviated form written as PTA, and the deficiency of this factor will actually cause hemophilia C. So if we see hemophilia A, deficiency of anti-hemophilic factor, sometimes the question can be asked as the deficiency of AHF causes what? So it will cause hemophilia A. All these hemophilic factors will actually increase the clotting time. See, we cannot afford the increase of clotting time of the blood, because the more is the clotting time taken by the blood, the more will be the blood loss during that time frame. Okay, so anti-hemophilic factor AHF, the deficiency of this causes hemophilia A and the clotting time increases. Christmas factor or plasma thromboplastin component, which is known as PTC, the deficiency causes hemophilia B. The Stewart power factor, which is produced in the liver. Plasma thromboplastin antecedent, it in abbreviated form is written as PTA, the deficiency causes hemophilia C. Hangman or surface factor. Hangman or surface factor is activated when it comes in contact with the skin surface. Okay, when it comes in contact with the skin surface. Then we have fibrin stabilizing factor or Lacky-Lovell factor, which is basically, see, we know that fibrinogen produces fibrin, so this needs to be stabilized. Okay, fibrin stabilizing factor, it is also released from blood platelets. So these are basically the 13 factors which keep on running with the blood. They are already there, but they become active only when there is an injury, whether it is internal or external, and they facilitate the formation of basically the coagulation of blood. So this coagulation will prevent the blood loss. It's very important to understand that coagulation cannot take place under normal circumstances. If the blood is running normally in the blood vessels, the coagulation cannot take place, because if it takes place, it will block the blood. So coagulation will be only taking place when if it blocks the blood, obviously it can prove fatal and give rise to complexities. Coagulation can only take place when there is an injury. Now understand this, you must have heard about people getting head injuries. Why are head injuries so critical? Okay, see, let's say if you if a person has received an head injury, that's the reason it's a mandate for people who are traveling on two-wheelers. They are more prone to head injuries when they fall down during an accident, and head injuries can really prove fatal because in our brain the capillaries are almost the thinnest in the body. So what will happen is, these brain capillaries, when they get injured during an accident, so obviously the blood will flow out and there will be clotting which will result. Now these brain capillaries are so thin that they cannot afford this clotting. If the clotting happens there, then the blood will not flow through these capillaries, and that can cause a serious consequence, including death. Okay, so that's the reason people are advised to wear helmets when they are riding two-wheelers, whatever two-wheelers there, and they are fined as well. The reason is because head injuries are very complex. Okay, so this might result in clotting of the capillaries, and this might prove very fatal to the individual. So that's the reason it is always advisable to wear helmets. So clotting is basically a very important factor, and at the same time, if it happens at the wrong place, obviously not the wrong place, it will happen for the right reasons, but if it happens in the wrong place, it can cause serious consequences. So we will look more into how the entire process of clotting takes place. Okay, so now we will look into the process of blood clotting, a very complex process. So we will first have a simpler version, and then we will see how in the cascading reaction all the 13 factors are involved. Okay, so first we will just simplify it. The process of blood clotting, the formation of prothrombin activator. So the prothrombin activator is formed, and it's a multi-step process. Okay, so this prothrombin activator would have two pathways. One, the extrinsic pathway, and the other one is intrinsic pathway. One is the extrinsic pathway and the other one is intrinsic pathway. So the injured tissue or injured platelets, it's a multi-step process. The injured tissue or the injured platelets at the site of injury, through a multi-step process, will form prothrombin activator. So this is basically an extrinsic pathway. So one, we have the extrinsic pathway, and the other one is the intrinsic pathway. So formation of prothrombin activator, it's a multi-step process, but there are two pathways. So the injured tissue or injured platelets through a multi-step process will form prothrombin activator. Okay, and what will happen is this prothrombin will actually get converted into thrombin. So the conversion of prothrombin into thrombin. So the prothrombin through prothrombin activator and calcium ions gets converted into thrombin. So through a series of reactions by the prothrombin activator and the calcium ions, it gets converted into thrombin. Conversion of fibrinogen to fibrin. Okay, so now the fibrinogen through thrombin reaction, through thrombin, basically fibrinogen is a soluble protein. Fibrinogen is a soluble protein, and through the enzyme thrombin, it gets converted into fibrin monomers, which is basically an insoluble form. This is an insoluble form. These fibrin monomers on polymerization will get a long thread of fibrin. So these fibrin monomers which are formed, fibrinogen is a soluble protein. By the action of thrombin, which is produced here, the prothrombin gets converted into thrombin. So this thrombin will now act on it, the fibrinogen, to form fibrin monomers, and this is an insoluble form. These fibrin monomers on polymerization give a long thread of fibrin, and at the injury site what happens is these threads, let's say this is the injury site, these threads basically form a dense network, and in this network the dead cells get the damaged and the dead cells get stuck. This results in the formation of clots, and this is called thrombus. So this results in the formation of clots, and this is called thrombus. So it's a number of multiple steps are not there. It's not as easy as it looks like, but we will study those, and this is just a gist of the extrinsic and the intrinsic pathways, and what is and how the this network of cells forms in order to stop the blood from oozing out, okay, from the injury site. So it is a multiple steps are involved, and all 13 factors are involved in a cascading reaction to form this complex, okay. Okay, so now we will look into the process of blood clotting, a very complex process. So we will first have a simpler version, and then we will see how in the cascading reaction all the 13 factors are involved, okay. So first we will just simplify it, the process of blood clotting, the formation of prothrombin activator. So the prothrombin activator is formed, and it's a multi-step process, okay. So this prothrombin activator would have two pathways, one the extrinsic pathway and the other one is intrinsic pathway. One is the extrinsic pathway and the other one is intrinsic pathway. So the injured tissue or injured platelets, it's a multi-step process. The injured tissue or the injured platelets at the site of injury through a multi-step process will form prothrombin activator. So this is basically an extrinsic pathway. So one we have the extrinsic pathway and the other one is the intrinsic pathway. So formation of prothrombin activator, it's a multi-step process, but there are two pathways. So the injured tissue or injured platelets through a multi-step process will form prothrombin activator, okay. And what will happen is this prothrombin will actually get converted into thrombin. So the conversion of prothrombin into thrombin. So the prothrombin through prothrombin activator and calcium ions gets converted into thrombin. So through a series of reactions by the prothrombin activator and the calcium ions, it gets converted into thrombin. Conversion of fibrinogen to fibrin, okay. So now the fibrinogen through thrombin reaction, through thrombin, basically fibrinogen is a soluble protein. Fibrinogen is a soluble protein, and through the enzyme thrombin, it gets converted into fibrin monomers, which is basically an insoluble form. This is an insoluble form. These fibrin monomers on polymerization will get a long thread of fibrin. So these fibrin monomers which are formed, fibrinogen is a soluble protein. By the action of thrombin, which is produced here, the prothrombin gets converted into thrombin. So this thrombin will now act on it, the fibrinogen, to form fibrin monomers, and this is an insoluble form. These fibrin monomers on polymerization give a long thread of fibrin, and at the injury site what happens is these threads, let's say this is the injury site, these threads basically form a dense network, and in this network the dead cells get the damaged and the dead cells get stuck. This results in the formation of clots, and this is called thrombus. So this results in the formation of clots, and this is called thrombus. So it's a number of multiple steps are not there. It's not as easy as it looks like, but we will study those, and this is just a gist of the extrinsic and the intrinsic pathways, and what is and how the this network of cells forms in order to stop the blood from oozing out, okay, from the injury site. So it is a multiple steps are involved, and all 13 factors are involved in a cascading reaction to form this complex, okay. Okay, so now we will look into the process of blood clotting, a very complex process. So we will first have a simpler version, and then we will see how in the cascading reaction all the 13 factors are involved. Okay, so first we will just simplify it. The process of blood clotting, the formation of prothrombin activator. So the prothrombin activator is formed, and it's a multi-step process. Okay, so this prothrombin activator would have two pathways, one the extrinsic pathway and the other one is intrinsic pathway. One is the extrinsic pathway and the other one is intrinsic pathway. So the injured tissue or injured platelets, it's a multi-step process. The injured tissue or the injured platelets at the site of injury through a multi-step process will form prothrombin activator. So this is basically an extrinsic pathway. So one, we have the extrinsic pathway and the other one is the intrinsic pathway. So formation of prothrombin activator, it's a multi-step process, but there are two pathways. So the injured tissue or injured platelets through a multi-step process will form prothrombin activator. Okay, and what will happen is this prothrombin will actually get converted into thrombin. So the conversion of prothrombin into thrombin. So the prothrombin through prothrombin activator and calcium ions gets converted into thrombin. So through a series of reactions by the prothrombin activator and the calcium ions, it gets converted into thrombin. Conversion of fibrinogen to fibrin. Okay, so now the fibrinogen through thrombin reaction, through thrombin, basically fibrinogen is a soluble protein. Fibrinogen is a soluble protein, and through the enzyme thrombin, it gets converted into fibrin monomers, which is basically an insoluble form. This is an insoluble form. These fibrin monomers on polymerization will get a long thread of fibrin. So these fibrin monomers which are formed, fibrinogen is a soluble protein. By the action of thrombin, which is produced here, the prothrombin gets converted into thrombin. So this thrombin will now act on it, the fibrinogen, to form fibrin monomers, and this is an insoluble form. These fibrin monomers on polymerization give a long thread of fibrin, and at the injury site what happens is these threads, let's say this is the injury site, these threads basically form a dense network, and in this network the dead cells get the damaged and the dead cells get stuck. This results in the formation of clots, and this is called thrombus. So this results in the formation of clots, and this is called thrombus. So it's the number of multiple steps are not there. It's not as easy as it looks like, but we will study those, and this is just a gist of the extrinsic and the intrinsic pathways, and what is and how the this network of cells forms in order to stop the blood from oozing out, okay, from the injury site. So it is a multiple steps are involved, and all 13 factors are involved in a cascading reaction to form this complex. Okay. Okay, so we will discuss about how the entire process of coagulation of blood basically takes place. Okay, very complex process, all the 13 factors are involved, and this is basically a cascade mechanism. What we mean by cascade mechanism is basically one process or one substance that is formed, it stimulates the formation of others. So basically a chain reaction is initiated. In this entire process, a chain reaction is initiated. So let's just quickly look at it. Formation of prothrombin. Formation of prothrombin. So what happens is prothrombin activator, basically this is the most essential part, and this prothrombin activator gets formed in two steps. One is the extrinsic pathway and the other one is the intrinsic pathway. So there are two steps in which the prothrombin activator is basically formed. Okay, so what happens? The injured tissue, we have this injured tissue, it is released from the injured tissue. So injured tissue releases what? Thromboplastin. Okay, this now the tissue the injured tissue released from the injured tissue is thromboplastin. The tissue thromboplastin in presence of factor 7. I am writing it in numbers. We should not write it in numbers. We have to write it in Roman numerals. In presence of factor 7, what it will do is it will activate factor 10. So as I said, all these factors are moving within the blood in an inactive form. So the injured tissue, extrinsic injury has happened. So let's say there is an external injury site, some place we have received an injury. So the injured tissue, from the injured tissue, the thromboplastin is released, and this thromboplastin in presence of factor 7 activates factor 10. Injured tissue, the damaged cells at the injured site will release thromboplastin in the presence of factor 7. Will activate factor 10 into its active form. So this was basically flowing in the blood in an active form, and this gets converted in an active form. Now this factor 10 in the presence of factor 5 and calcium ions are also known as factor 4. Okay, factor 4. So factor 10, which is activated now in the presence of factor 5 and calcium ions, which are also known as factor 4, gets converted into prothrombin activator. Okay, this step would trigger step number 2, which we are going to discuss. Okay, so conversion of prothrombin into thrombin, which is basically conversion of prothrombin into thrombin. So again, extrinsic pathway gets triggered by an external injury. The external injury site releases thromboplastin. The damaged cells release thromboplastin. The thromboplastin in the presence of factor 7 will activate factor 10, and this active factor 10 will, in the presence of factor 5 and calcium ions, that is factor 4, get converted into prothrombin activator, and then prothrombin activator will basically initiate a cascade of reactions. Now, as we said, this was from the extrinsic pathway. Now let's look at the intrinsic pathway. We have seen, where do I represent? Okay, we have seen that in the blood vessels, arteries or veins, we have basically the lumen part, then we have the tunica interna, tunica media, tunica externa, tunica interna, tunica media, and tunica externa. Now this tunica externa, of course we have different size and shapes for arteries and veins. So the lumen size is more in veins, whereas in arteries these are more, the tunica media is more. Now in tunica externa, once the blood in the lumen gets in touch with the tunica externa. So when will this happen? Obviously if there is an injury. Now this injury can be internal or external. If the blood in the lumen of an artery or a vein gets in touch with the tunica externa, then this intrinsic pathway is generated. Again, intrinsic pathway is generated when the blood in the lumen gets in touch with the tunica externa. So intrinsic pathway, this is triggered when blood comes in contact with the collagen of the blood vessel, that is tunica externa. We know that collagen fibers are primarily present in the tunica externa. So the moment the blood comes in contact with the tunica externa, this is generated. Okay, has collagen fibers happens due to rupture of blood vessel, obviously. So due to any rupture of blood vessels, this will be triggered. Okay, so now what will happen? So again, so this is triggered. The triggering of this issue is an external injury, whereas the triggering of this issue is due to the rupture of a blood vessel, which might not be the result of an external injury. But here the blood in the lumen of an artery or a vein, that is of a blood vessel or a capillary, has to come in touch with the collagen of the tunica externa. Okay, so that will happen only if there is a rupture of the blood vessel. Okay, now we will talk about the intrinsic pathway in detail. So what happens is, here the factor 12 gets activated to factor 12. So this is basically an inactive state. The moment this happens, the reaction is triggered and this factor 12 gets activated. Now this factor 12 which is activated, it helps in the conversion of inactive factor 11 to active factor 11. So inactive factor 11 gets converted into active factor 11. This again will help in the conversion of inactive factor 9 to active factor 9 in the presence of calcium ions, which is also known as the fourth factor. Okay, now this factor which is formed, the active factor 9, this helps in the conversion of factor 10 to active factor 10. So inactive factor 10 gets converted into active factor 10. Okay, so you see how the factors are basically getting involved in all the conversions. Okay, now this active factor 10 in presence of the factor 5 and a chemical from the damaged blood vessels, basically thromboplastin, platelets and phospholipids. Okay, so in the presence of the fifth factor and these chemicals, it gets converted into the final product of prothrombin activator. So whether it is the extrinsic pathway or the intrinsic pathway, what we are getting is the prothrombin activator. This prothrombin activator will actually lead to the step 2. So it's a gradual process, a cascade of mechanisms, interlinked process, and hence we have to be very careful about which factor participates in the conversion of which factor. Okay, so now this prothrombin activator converts prothrombin into thrombin plus factor 4 in the presence of factor 4. So this prothrombin activator, this will convert prothrombin into thrombin in the presence of factor 4, that is calcium ions. So we can see the involvement of calcium ions in almost all the processes, extrinsic, intrinsic, or even prothrombin to thrombin. Okay, so this is step number 2 in the coagulating mechanism. Now conversion of fibrinogen to fibrin. So fibrinogen is already present in the blood plasma, but it is present in a soluble form. Fibrinogen is basically a soluble protein that is present in the blood plasma. This gets converted into insoluble protein. This gets converted into an insoluble protein, okay, with the help of step number 2. So thrombin, which is produced in step number 2, will actually help in the conversion of fibrinogen to fibrin. Okay, thrombin, which is produced by prothrombin activator, which converts prothrombin into thrombin, this will help the fibrinogen, which is present as soluble form of protein in the plasma, into an insoluble form of fibrin. Okay, and this insoluble form will start precipitating. Okay, so this is the first form that is formed is monomer, and these monomers will start joining with each other, forming a polymerization reaction, and this is called the fibrin thread. So factor 13 is required for this conversion. Factor 13 is basically involved in this conversion. So a dense network of thread is formed, and these network of threads basically combine with each other to form a dense mesh of cells. Okay, so this is what happens at the injury site. There is such a dense network that is initiated. So this fibrin thread basically is a result of the monomerization. So the monomers get polymerized to the fibrin threads, and these fibrin threads start accumulating at the injury site, and all the damaged and dead cells get trapped in it. So it basically blocks the blood flow from the injury site. Okay, so this is basically a cascade of mechanisms. One mechanism or one reaction stimulates the other, and hence a chain reaction is initiated. Yes, it's a complex process. Yes, it will require the involvement of all 13 or rather 12. You don't see the factor which we have discussed here. So 13 or the 12 factors in the process. Okay, so yes, it is a complex process, but a very important process, which is a life-saving process, and it can be a threatening process as well if it happens at the wrong place. Obviously the place will not be wrong, but any injury to the capillaries in the brain, it can actually prove detrimental, and clotting of blood out there can actually prove very fatal to the person having it. Okay, so this is the cascade of reactions that we need to have a close look and remember as well.